In the depths of space, where ancient civilizations clash and forgotten magic still pulses through the void, there exists a truth that terrifies the galaxy's most powerful beings. Humans don't just survive the impossible, they make it their home. When the last sanctuary of an extinct race becomes humanity's refuge, and their children bond with creatures that once toppled empires, the universe is about to learn why Earth's children are the most dangerous guardians it has ever seen. What happens when a species that turns nightmares into family pets discovers they're not alone in their strange gift for taming the untamable? The crystalline corridors of Sanctuary Station hummed with an energy that made Zeph-High's scales tingle beneath his biosuit. As the assigned guardian of this remote outpost, he had witnessed many strange things during his 5-year tenure, but nothing quite prepared him for the sight that greeted him during his midnight patrol rounds. The human residential sector was supposed to be quiet at this hour. The refugees who had arrived 3 months ago from the destroyed Earth colony of New Geneva were typically asleep by now, exhausted from their daily struggles to adapt to alien technology and customs. Zeph-High had grown fond of these resilient creatures, though he would never admit it to his superiors back on the Kethmori homeworld. His thermal sensors detected an anomaly in quarters 77 Alpha. The signature was wrong, too cold for a sleeping human, yet there was definitely life present. Zeph-High's 4 eyes narrowed as he approached the door, his elongated fingers dancing across his wrist-mounted scanner. The readings were impossible. According to his instruments, there was a human present, but the thermal output suggested they were in some form of hibernation state. The door's security protocols recognized his guardian authorization, sliding open with barely a whisper. What Zeph-High saw inside made his respiratory slits flutter in shock. A young human female lay curled on the cold metal floor, wearing what appeared to be some form of primitive cleaning attire. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple arrangement, and, despite the uncomfortable sleeping surface, her face held an expression of peaceful exhaustion. She was small, even by human standards, possibly no more than 20 standard cycles old. But it wasn't the girl that made Zeph-High's hand instinctively move toward his neural disruptor. Curled against her back, its tiny claws gripping the fabric of her strange uniform, was something that shouldn't exist anywhere in the known galaxy. A dragon hatchling. Zeph-High's knowledge banks immediately flooded his consciousness with data. The Pyrothian dragons had been extinct for over 2,000 years, wiped out during the Great Purge when the Galactic Coalition had deemed them too dangerous to coexist with civilized species. Their ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level, combined with their fierce intelligence and natural telepathic abilities, had made them a threat that the galaxy's governing bodies couldn't tolerate. Yet here was a hatchling, no larger than a human's forearm, its scales shimmering between deep emerald and gold even in the dim emergency lighting. Its wings were folded tightly against its serpentine body, and occasional puffs of what looked like glittering smoke emerged from its tiny nostrils. The creature's eyes opened as if sensing Zeph-High's presence. Instead of the predatory glare he expected, the dragon regarded him with curious intelligence. There was no fear, no aggression. It simply watched him with ancient wisdom that seemed impossible for something so young. Zeph-High's training demanded immediate action. Report the discovery, isolate the subjects, and await further orders from command. The presence of a Pyrothian dragon, regardless of its apparent docility, represented a potential threat that could destabilize the entire sector. The last time dragons had been encountered, 3-star systems had been evacuated before military forces could contain the situation. But something stopped him from reaching for his communication device. The girl stirred, her arm tightening protectively around the small dragon without even waking. The creature made a soft, trilling sound, nuzzling closer to her warmth. There was something fundamentally wrong with everything Zeph-High had been taught about these creatures. According to all records, dragons were solitary, aggressive, and had never shown any inclination toward bonding with other species. Humans, however, had a documented history that defied explanation. During his briefings about the Earth refugees, Zeph-High had learned fascinating details about human behavior. They had a peculiar tendency to form emotional bonds with creatures that other species found terrifying or dangerous. They kept predators as companions, nursed wounded animals back to health regardless of risk, and somehow inspired loyalty in species that had never shown such traits before. The galaxy had initially dismissed these reports as exaggeration or primitive behavior, that would be corrected through proper education. But the evidence was overwhelming. Human colonies had thrived in environments where other species failed, not through superior technology, but through their ability to form symbiotic relationships with local life forms that others couldn't even approach safely. Zephi found himself kneeling beside the sleeping pair, his scanner providing detailed readings he wasn't sure he wanted to record. The dragon's biological signatures were fascinating. Unlike the aggressive metabolic patterns described in historical records, this hatchling showed signs of deep contentment. Its brainwave patterns suggested a level of emotional stability that seemed impossible for a creature whose species had once terrorized the galaxy. The girl's readings were equally intriguing. Despite sleeping on a cold metal floor in what appeared to be uncomfortable clothing, her stress hormones were at remarkably low levels. Her heart rate was steady, and her sleep patterns suggested deep, restorative rest. Most curious of all, there were trace energy signatures around her that Zephi had never encountered before, something that seemed to resonate in harmony with the dragon's own bioelectric field. A soft chime from his communicator reminded Zephi that he was behind schedule for his patrol report. Standard protocol required him to log any anomalies immediately. He stared down at the peaceful scene before him, his duty warring with something he couldn't quite identify. The human administrative records listed the girl as Maya Chun, age 19 standard years, occupation listed as maintenance technician. Her file indicated she had arrived on one of the last evacuation ships from New Geneva, traveling alone with no family members listed. The notation suggested she had volunteered to work in sanitation and cleaning services in exchange for basic accommodations. Zephi's research into human social structures had taught him that such arrangements often indicated economic desperation. The girl was likely working multiple shifts to afford even basic necessities, which would explain why she had fallen asleep on the floor rather than in proper quarters. The injustice of the situation stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. The dragon hatchling opened one eye again, fixing its gaze on Zephi with unmistakable intelligence. For a moment, Guardian and Dragon regarded each other in silence. Then, to Zephi's amazement, the creature made a soft, almost questioning sound, not aggressive or defensive, but curious. It was as if the dragon was asking for his approval, or perhaps his protection. Zephi's four hands trembled slightly as he made a decision that would have shocked his fellow Kethmori. Instead of reaching for his communicator, he activated his personal environmental controls and adjusted the temperature in the small quarters. The metal flooring warmed noticeably within moments. The girl stirred again, this time her eyes fluttering open. When she saw Zephi's imposing 7-foot frame looming over her, she should have screamed. Human fear responses were well documented, and the sight of a Kethmori's scaled features and multiple limbs typically triggered immediate panic in most species. Instead, Maya-chan looked up at him with tired but alert eyes and whispered, "Did I oversleep? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be late for my shift." Her first concern wasn't for her own safety or even the illegal creature she harbored. She was worried about her responsibilities. Zephi found himself struggling to process this response. "You are not late," he managed to say, his voice modulator translating his words in her native language. "I am conducting routine security rounds. Are you comfortable here?" Maya glanced around the small quarters that barely qualified as living space, then down at the dragon still curled against her back. For a moment, fear flickered across her features, not of Zephi, but of what his discovery might mean for her small companion. "Please," she whispered, her hand moving protectively over the dragon. "He's just a baby. He's never hurt anyone. He was so cold and hungry when I found him, and he doesn't have anyone else." The simple honesty in her voice did something to Zephi that he would spend considerable time trying to understand later. Here was a member of a refugee species, barely surviving in the harshest conditions allowed by galactic law, and her primary concern was for the welfare of a creature that the rest of the galaxy would consider an existential threat. "What is his name?" Zephi found himself asking. Maya's expression brightened with surprise. "Ember. I call him Ember because of the way his scales catch the light. I know I'm not supposed to have pets, but he's not really a pet. He's more like—" She paused, searching for words. "He's family." The dragon, Ember, chose that moment to stretch, tiny wings unfurling briefly before settling back against Maya's form. The action released a shower of sparkling motes that danced in the air around them, each particle glowing with soft inner light before fading. It was beautiful and somehow completely unthreatening. Zephai's worldview, carefully constructed through years of military training and species-specific education, began to crumble as he watched a supposedly extinct apex predator behave like a contented infant with its mother. "How long have you cared for him?" Zephai asked, settling into a more comfortable position. His scanner readings could wait. "About 2 weeks," Maya said, sitting up carefully so as not to disturb Ember. "I found him in one of the abandoned sections while I was cleaning. He was alone and so small. I think he might have been hiding there for a while." "The other eggs?" She trailed off, her expression growing sad. "Other eggs?" Maya nodded toward a corner of her quarters where Zephai now noticed a small collection of crystalline shells, all cracked and empty. "There were 5 others, but they didn't make it. I think Ember was the only one strong enough to hatch on his own. He was trying to eat the broken shells when I found him." The implications of what she was telling him began to sink in. A clutch of dragon eggs had somehow survived on the station for who knew how long. The fact that only one had hatched suggested either poor environmental conditions or that they had been abandoned without proper care. Dragons were known to be devoted parents in the historical records. For a clutch to be left unattended implied something tragic had occurred. "Maya," Zephai said carefully, "do you understand what Ember is? What his species represents?" She looked down at the small dragon, who had begun to purr with a sound like distant thunder. "I know he's special. I've never seen anything like him in any of the databases I can access. But I also know he's just a baby who needed someone to take care of him. Isn't that what matters?" Her simple philosophy struck Zephai with its profound implications. While the galaxy's greatest minds debated the theoretical dangers of extinct species and drafted complex protocols for impossible scenarios, a 19-year-old human refugee had simply seen a baby who needed care and acted accordingly. The results spoke for themselves. Ember showed no signs of the aggressive tendencies that had made his species legendary. He was calm, affectionate, and seemingly bonded to Maya in a way that suggested deep emotional connection. If the historical records were accurate, this should have been impossible. Unless the records were incomplete, Zephai activated his personal research protocols, accessing databases that his guardian status allowed him to reach. As information flowed across his neural interface, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The historical accounts of dragon aggression were remarkably consistent in their details, but they all originated from the same time period and the same sources, military reports from the forces that had carried out the Great Purge. There were virtually no civilian accounts, no scientific studies, and no records from species that had coexisted peacefully with dragons. It was as if an entire perspective had been deliberately erased from history. "Maya," Zephai said slowly, "I need you to understand something important. According to galactic law, Ember's species is classified as extinct and extremely dangerous. If my superiors discover his presence here, they will order his immediate termination." Fear flashed across Maya's features, but it quickly hardened into determination. "Then they won't find out," she said simply. "I'll keep him hidden. I'll find a better place, somewhere they'll never look. The station's sensors will detect him eventually," Zephai explained. "His energy signature is unique. It's only a matter of time before someone else notices the anomalies." Maya's shoulders sagged as the reality of the situation hit her. "So what you're saying is that it doesn't matter how gentle he is, or how much he trusts people, or how he's never shown any sign of being dangerous. They'll kill him just because of what he is." The simple injustice of it seemed to affect her more than any personal hardship she had endured. Zephai found himself increasingly impressed by the human capacity for empathy, even as he struggled with his own growing moral conflict. "There may be another option," he heard himself saying, though he had no idea what that option might be. Maya looked up at him with hope that made his scales tighten with responsibility. He had just committed himself to something that could end his career and possibly his life, and he couldn't explain why he felt compelled to do so. Ember stirred again, this time crawling carefully up Maya's arm to perch on her shoulder. From this position, he could study Zephai more closely. The dragon's head tilted with bird-like curiosity, and then he made a soft, chirping sound that seemed almost like a greeting. Without conscious thought, Zephai extended one of his hands toward the small creature. Ember considered the offered limb for a moment, then carefully stepped onto Zephai's palm, his tiny claws finding secure purchase on the alien scaled skin. The moment of contact sent a shock through Zephai's nervous system. It wasn't painful, but it was profound, like suddenly hearing a piece of music he had been trying to remember his entire life. For just an instant, he felt what Ember was experiencing: curiosity, contentment, and a deep sense of belonging. There was no aggression, no predatory instinct, just the emotional landscape of a young creature who had found his place in the universe. When the sensation faded, Zephai found himself looking at Maya with new understanding. She had been experiencing this connection every day for 2 weeks. No wonder she was willing to risk everything to protect Ember. "He likes you," Maya said softly, watching as Ember settled comfortably in Zephai's palm. "He's usually more cautious with strangers." "The feeling is mutual," Zephai admitted, though saying so felt like crossing a line he could never step back over. "Maya, I need you to promise me something. Don't try to hide him alone. If we're going to keep Ember safe, we need to be smart about it." Her eyes widened. "We?" Zephai looked down at the small dragon in his palm, then back at the human girl who had somehow accomplished something the galaxy's greatest experts had declared impossible. "It appears I've become personally invested in this situation," he said. "Give me 24 hours to research our options. In the meantime, can you adjust your work schedule to stay in these quarters as much as possible?" Maya nodded eagerly. "I can claim illness for a day or two without anyone asking questions. Most of the other humans have been dealing with adaptation sickness anyway." "Good." Zephai carefully transferred Ember back to Maya's hands, noting how naturally the dragon settled into her familiar grip. "I'll return tomorrow night with more information. Until then, keep him hidden and try not to use any technology that might amplify his energy signature." As Zephai prepared to leave, Maya's voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you," she said simply. "I know you're taking a huge risk for us." He turned back to see her cradling Ember against her chest, both of them looking at him with expressions of trust that made his respiratory slits tighten with emotion. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "some risks are worth taking." The door slid closed behind him, leaving Zephai alone in the corridor with the weight of his decision and the echo of a dragon's contented purr. As he resumed his patrol, his mind was already racing through possibilities, resources, and the growing certainty that his life had just taken a turn towards something unprecedented. Behind him, in the small quarters that barely qualified as adequate shelter, a human girl and a dragon that shouldn't exist settled back in a sleep, their shared warmth a small defiance against the cold indifference of space and the even colder laws of galactic civilization. The revolution had begun with a moment of simple kindness, though none of them knew it yet. 26 hours later, Zephai stood outside Maya's quarters with information that would either save Ember's life or doom them all. His research had taken him deep into classified archives that his guardian clearance had barely been sufficient to access, and what he had discovered challenged everything he thought he knew about galactic history. The chime announcing his presence was answered immediately, suggesting Maya had been watching for his return. When the door slid open, he was greeted by a sight that made his scales ripple with amusement despite the gravity of their situation. Maya had constructed an elaborate obstacle course throughout her small quarters using maintenance supplies and cleaning equipment. Ember was currently navigating through a series of hoops made from reclaimed tubing, his tiny wings providing just enough lift to carry him from platform to platform. The dragon was clearly enjoying himself, occasionally performing unnecessary aerial loops that sent sparkles of light cascading through the air. "He's incredibly intelligent," Maya explained, noticing Zephai's surprised observation. "He learned the whole course in just 2 hours, and now he keeps making up new variations. Watch this." Maya held up a small piece of the protein rations that served as standard refugee food. Instead of simply flying to her hand, Ember performed an elaborate spiral dive, executed a perfect barrel roll, and landed precisely on her palm with wings spread in what could only be described as a flourish. "Show off," Maya said affectionately, offering him the treat. Zephai's thermal sensors indicated that Ember's body temperature had increased significantly since their first meeting. The dragon's scales now held a warm, healthy glow, and his movements displayed an energy and confidence that spoke of excellent care. Whatever Maya was doing, it was clearly working. "You've been busy," Zephai observed. "He needed stimulation," Maya explained. "I've been reading about reptilian intelligence in the database, and everything suggested that boredom could lead to behavioral problems. Plus, he seems to learn faster when he's having fun." The casual way she spoke about research and behavioral modification reminded Zephi that humans often possessed educational backgrounds that their current circumstances didn't reflect. What was your field of study before the evacuation? Maya's expression grew wistful. Xenobiology and interspecies psychology. I was working on my advanced certification when New Geneva was attacked. All my research data was lost, along with everything else. Suddenly, her expertise with Ember made perfect sense. Maya wasn't just a kind-hearted refugee who had stumbled into an impossible situation. She was a trained scientist who understood exactly what she was dealing with. The implications of this discovery sent Zephai's mind racing. Maya, he said carefully, in your xenobiology studies, did you ever encounter references to the Pyrothian dragons? Her hands stilled in their automatic stroking of Ember's scales. You know what he is? I suspected from the beginning. My research has confirmed it. Maya was quiet for a long moment, her academic training clearly warring with her protective instincts. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of scientific curiosity and personal fear. The records about his species are incomplete, aren't they? Or worse, they're deliberately falsified. Zephai's respect for the young human increased exponentially. How did you reach that conclusion? Behavioral inconsistencies, Maya said, settling cross-legged on her sleeping mat with Ember curling up in her lap. Everything in the official records describes Pyrothian dragons as solitary, aggressive, and incapable of forming bonds with other species. But Ember's behavior suggests highly developed social instincts, emotional intelligence, and an almost desperate need for companionship. Either he's a massive genetic anomaly, or the historical records are fundamentally flawed. She paused, looking up at Zephi with eyes that held both hope and dread. You found something, didn't you? Something that explains why the official story doesn't match reality. Zephi activated his personal privacy shields, creating a small bubble of interference that would prevent their conversation from being monitored. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of galactic security. Sharing this information with you violates multiple laws and could result in my execution. Maya's expression grew serious. Are you sure you want to take that risk? Ember isn't the first dragon to survive the Great Purge, Zephi said, making his decision. There have been sightings across 7 different sectors over the past 50 years. Each time, the dragons were found in association with human settlements or refugee groups. And, in every case, the dragons displayed the same behavioral patterns we see in Ember: social bonding, emotional stability, and complete lack of aggression. Maya's academic excitement warred with her protective fear. What happened to the others? Zephai's scales darkened with what humans might recognize as anger. They were terminated immediately upon discovery, along with their human companions. The official reports listed the deaths as necessary action to prevent species proliferation, but the classified files tell a different story. He activated a holographic display from his personal storage unit, showing Maya a series of documents that made her face pale. The dragons weren't killed because they were dangerous. They were killed because they were proving that the historical records were lies. The evidence was overwhelming. Scientific reports, suppressed for decades, documented dragon behavior that completely contradicted official galactic policy. Peaceful coexistence, mutual protection pacts, dragons working alongside human colonies to terraform hostile worlds. Most damaging of all, evidence that dragons have been systematically hunted to near extinction, not because they were aggressive, but because their symbiotic relationship with humans gave those colonies advantages that threatened established galactic power structures. The Pyrothian dragons weren't just intelligent, Zephi explained. They were capable of manipulating matter at the molecular level in ways that allowed their human partners to thrive in environments that should have been impossible to colonize. They could purify toxic atmospheres, transmute basic elements into rare minerals, and even accelerate plant growth through some form of biological alchemy. Maya looked down at Ember, who had begun to glow softly as he dozed in her lap. That's why they had to be eliminated. They made human colonies too successful, too independent. The Galactic Coalition's member species couldn't compete with human settlements that had dragon partners, Zephi confirmed. So they created a false narrative about dragon aggression and used it to justify a genocide that eliminated both the dragons and the most successful human colonies. The weight of this revelation settled over them both. Ember wasn't just an endangered species. He was a living reminder of one of the galaxy's greatest crimes, and proof that the established order was built on deliberate deception. But why are you telling me this? Maya asked. What do you think we can do with this information? Zephai's 4 eyes met her too, and she saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. Because I think it's time the galaxy learned the truth about what humans and dragons can accomplish together. Before Maya could respond, Ember stirred in her lap. The small dragon's eyes opened, and he looked directly at Zephai with an expression of unmistakable intelligence. Then, to both of their amazement, Ember began to emit a soft, melodic sound that seemed to resonate in the air around them. Is he singing? Maya whispered. The sound grew stronger, and the air in the small quarters began to shimmer. Suddenly, Maya's meager possessions started to change. The rough protein rations on her shelf transformed into something that looked and smelled like fresh fruit. The recycled water in her conservation unit took on a crystal clarity that suggested perfect purity. Even the harsh emergency lighting seemed to warm and soften, creating an atmosphere of comfort that neither of them had experienced in months. He's changing the molecular structure of everything in this room, Zephai said in wonder, his scanners providing readings that defied explanation. This should be impossible for a hatchling. Maya stared around her transformed quarters in amazement. The records said adult dragons could do this, but nothing suggested the ability manifested this early. Unless, Zephai said slowly, the ability doesn't depend solely on physical maturity, but on emotional security and bonding. Ember feels safe with you, Maya. He trusts you completely. That trust might be amplifying abilities that wouldn't normally emerge for years. Ember finished his song and looked up at them with what could only be described as pride. He had transformed Maya's inadequate living space into something approaching a proper home, and he clearly expected approval for his efforts. Good boy, Maya whispered, stroking his scales as tears ran down her cheeks. You beautiful, impossible little miracle. The display of power changed everything about their situation. Ember wasn't just a harmless pet who happened to belong to an extinct species. He was potentially one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and he was completely bonded to a human refugee who had nothing to lose and every reason to challenge the established order. We can't hide him anymore, Zephai said, though he found the words difficult to speak. His abilities are too strong, too noticeable. The station's sensors will have detected the molecular changes he just performed. Maya's face hardened with determination. Then we don't hide. We run. Where could you possibly go? The Coalition has jurisdiction over every settled system. Not every system, Maya said, her xenobiology training providing answers that Zephai's military background had overlooked. There are uncharted regions, systems that haven't been claimed by any government, places where the Coalition has no legal authority. Those regions are uncharted because they're considered uninhabitable, Zephai pointed out. Maya looked down at Ember, who was now casually transmuting the metal flooring beneath them into something that felt warm and organic. Maybe they're only uninhabitable if you don't have a dragon partner. The idea was audacious, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also exactly the kind of desperate gamble the humans seemed to specialize in. Zephai found himself calculating odds and resources, his tactical training engaged despite his better judgment. Even if such a plan were theoretically possible, he said slowly, you would need a ship, supplies, navigational data for uncharted space, and some way to avoid Coalition pursuit fleets. All things that a station guardian might have access to, Maya said hopefully. Zephai stared at her for a long moment, realizing that she was asking him to abandon everything he had ever known for the sake of a human girl and a baby dragon. The logical response should have been immediate refusal. His duty was to the station, to the Coalition, to the established order that had given his life meaning and purpose. But looking at Ember, who had curled up trustingly in Maya's lap while casually performing feats of matter manipulation that the galaxy's greatest scientists claimed were impossible, Zephai found his loyalty shifting towards something far more important than duty. There's an abandoned research station in the Kalian Nebula, he heard himself saying. It was evacuated 20 years ago when the nebula's radiation began interfering with electronics, but the facility itself is still structurally sound. Maya's eyes widened. You're serious? The nebula's interference would mask your energy signatures from coalition scanners. Zephi continued, his mind already working through the logistics. With Ember's abilities, you might be able to convert the station into a viable living environment. What about you? Maya asked. If you help us escape, you'll be branded a traitor. Zephi considered this for a moment, then made a decision that surprised him with its simplicity. Then, I suppose I'll have to come with you. The magnitude of what they were contemplating began to sink in. They were talking about theft, treason, and fleeing into uncharted space with no guarantee of survival. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Zephi felt more alive than he had in years. We'll need to move quickly, he said, his guardian training taking over. Station security reviews the sensor logs every 72 hours. Ember's molecular manipulation will show up as massive anomalies that can't be explained away. How long do we have? Maya asked. 68 hours until the next scheduled review. After that, we'll have coalition security forces boarding the station within days. Maya looked down at Ember, who had begun to purr again, his contentment creating small sparkles of light around them. Then, we'd better get started. Zephi activated his personal communication array, connecting to databases and supply manifest that his guardian status gave him access to. I can acquire a small exploration vessel without triggering immediate alarms, but we'll need to disguise it as routine maintenance patrol until we're clear of coalition space. What about supplies? Leave that to me. I have access to emergency provisions that are supposed to be reserved for evacuation scenarios. Zephi's mandibles clicked with what humans might recognize as grim amusement. I think this qualifies. Over the next several hours, they planned their escape with the careful detail of trained professionals. Maya's xenobiology background proved invaluable in calculating the resources they would need to survive in an uncharted system, while Zephi's security clearances allowed him to acquire equipment and supplies without raising suspicions. Ember, meanwhile, seemed to sense the importance of their preparations. The small dragon remained quiet and alert, occasionally using his abilities to improve their simple tools or purify their water supplies. Each demonstration of his power reinforced their conviction that they were making the right choice. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Zephi made his final preparations. Tomorrow, he would submit a routine request for a long-range patrol vessel, ostensibly to investigate some nebula anomalies that existed only in falsified reports he was about to create. By the time anyone realized the deception, they would be well beyond coalition jurisdiction. Are you afraid? Maya asked as Zephi prepared to leave. He considered the question seriously. Fear was a reasonable response to what they were about to attempt. They were risking everything on the possibility that a 19-year-old human and a baby dragon could succeed where entire civilizations had failed. No, he said, surprising himself with the honesty of the answer. I think I'm hopeful. Maya smiled, the first truly joyful expression he had seen from her since their first meeting. Ember and I are good at making impossible things work. As if summoned by his name, the small dragon looked up at Zephi and made a soft trilling sound that seemed to carry undertones of encouragement and determination. In that moment, Zephi understood that he wasn't just helping a refugee escape persecution. He was becoming part of something that might change the galaxy forever. 64 hours, he said, checking his chronometer. Be ready. The door slid closed behind him, leaving Maya and Ember to continue their preparations. As Zephi walked the familiar corridors of the station he was about to abandon, he felt the weight of centuries of lies and oppression that had shaped galactic civilization. Tomorrow, that would begin to change. Revolution, he reflected, often began with the smallest acts of kindness. In their case, it had started with a girl who couldn't bear to let a baby dragon go hungry and cold. Where it would lead, none of them could predict, but Zephi was certain it would be extraordinary. Behind him, soft dragon song echoed through the walls as Ember practiced transforming their few possessions into the tools they would need for survival. The sound carried hope, power, and the promise of a future where the galaxy's greatest lies could finally be exposed. The countdown to freedom had begun. The exploration vessel Stellar Wanderer cut through the void between systems with the steady pulse of engines that had been designed for long-range surveys rather than speed. In the cargo bay that Zephi had converted into temporary living quarters, Maya sat cross-legged on a makeshift bed, while Ember explored his new environment with the fearless curiosity of youth. They had been traveling for 3 days since their escape from Sanctuary Station, and each hour carried them further from Coalition space and deeper into regions that galactic cartographers had marked simply as unexplored. The nebula that was their destination appeared on their screens as a swirling mass of color and radiation that made conventional sensors useless beyond a few thousand kilometers. Navigation shows we'll reach the nebula's outer boundary in 6 hours, Zephi announced from the pilot station. His 4 hands worked across control surfaces with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years mastering every system on the ship. Maya looked up from the datapad, where she had been reviewing environmental specifications for the abandoned research station. Are you sure the facility will still be functional after 20 years of exposure to nebula radiation? The Kalian research station was built to withstand exactly that kind of exposure, Zephi explained. The original project was studying how radiation affects matter transformation, so they used materials that actually became stronger when exposed to certain energy frequencies. Ember chose that moment to demonstrate his own approach to matter transformation by transmuting a piece of standard ration packaging into what appeared to be a small flowering plant. The delicate blossoms released a fragrance that reminded Maya of the garden she had studied in her xenobotany courses. He's getting stronger, Maya observed, gently stroking the dragon's scales as he settled in her lap with obvious satisfaction. Yesterday, he could only change simple molecular structures, but this involved creating living tissue from inorganic materials. Zephi's scanners detected the transformation and added the readings to the growing database he had been compiling about Ember's abilities. His power seems to increase when he feels secure and content. The more comfortable he becomes with our situation, the more sophisticated his transmutations become. Which means that if we can establish a safe, stable environment for him, his abilities might develop beyond anything the historical record suggested was possible. The implications of that possibility had been occupying both of their thoughts during the long hours of interstellar travel. If Ember continued to grow in power while bonded to Maya, they might eventually be capable of creating a sustainable civilization in a region that other species couldn't even survey properly. Their contemplation was interrupted by a proximity alarm that sent Zephi's hands dancing across his control board. "We have company," he announced grimly. The main display screen lit up with the distinctive energy signatures of 3 Coalition pursuit vessels, their sleek configurations designed for speed and firepower rather than exploration. They had been following the stellar wanderer for the past 12 hours, staying just at the edge of sensor range while presumably gathering intelligence about their quarry's destination. Military or security? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Security Division, Heavy Response Unit, Zephi confirmed, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "They're not here to arrest us, Maya. They're here to eliminate us and anything we might be carrying." The lead pursuit vessel opened a communication channel, flooding their ship with an authoritative voice that spoke in the clipped tones of Coalition authority. "Vessel Stellar Wanderer, you are in violation of multiple galactic security statutes. Heave to immediately and prepare for boarding." Zephi muted the transmission and turned to Maya with an expression that mixed determination and regret. "They can't know about Ember's specific abilities yet, or they would have tried to capture us alive for study. The fact that they sent a heavy response unit means they're operating under the standard protocol for dragon sightings, total elimination." Maya felt cold fear settle in her stomach, but her protective instincts immediately overwhelmed her personal terror. "How long until we reach the nebula?" 4 hours, 17 minutes at current speed. "Can we outrun them?" Zephi's scales rippled in what humans might recognize as frustrated admiration. Under normal circumstances, no. Those ships are designed for pursuit and have significantly more powerful engines than an exploration vessel. "But these aren't normal circumstances," Maya said, looking down at Ember, who had been listening to their conversation with obvious intelligence. The small dragon met her gaze and made a soft, questioning sound that seemed to ask for permission. Maya nodded, and Ember immediately began to sing in the melodic tones that preceded his most impressive transformations. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the ship, systems began to respond faster, more efficiently. The engine output increased by 30% as Ember somehow optimized the fuel conversion process at the molecular level. Navigation sensors became more sensitive and precise. Even the life support systems began to operate with improved efficiency that made the air itself feel cleaner and more energizing. Impossible, Zeph breathed, watching his instruments register improvements that shouldn't have been achievable without complete system reconstruction. He's enhancing our entire ship from the inside out. The Coalition vessels had expected to chase down a fleeing exploration ship and had calculated their pursuit accordingly. What they found themselves trying to catch was something that no longer followed conventional physics. The Stellar Wanderer began to pull away from its pursuers with acceleration that defied its original design specifications. Warning shots incoming, Zeph announced as energy bursts lit up the space around them. The Coalition ships had abandoned any pretense of arrest or negotiation. Their weapons systems were charging for lethal force, and the void between ships began to fill with the distinctive glow of military-grade energy weapons. "They're not even trying to disable us," Maya observed with a mixture of fear and anger. "Dragon Protocol leaves no room for capture," Zeph explained bitterly. "Orders are to destroy any vessel suspected of harboring Pyrothian dragons, regardless of circumstances." A direct hit shook the Stellar Wanderer, sending both Maya and Ember tumbling across the cargo bay. Emergency lights flashed as hull integrity warnings echoed through the ship. But instead of the catastrophic decompression that such a hit should have caused, the damaged sections began to repair themselves as Ember's song took on new harmonics. "He's healing the ship," Maya said in wonder, watching as torn metal flowed back together and damaged circuits realigned themselves into perfect function. The Coalition pursuit vessels were now faced with something completely outside their tactical training. Their target was not only faster than predicted, but appeared to be capable of surviving direct weapon hits that should have destroyed it completely. The pursuit commander's tactical computer had no protocols for dealing with a ship that seemed to become stronger the more damage it received. 3 hours, 42 minutes to the nebula, Zeph reported. "But they're going to keep hitting us, and I don't know how long Ember can maintain these enhancements." Maya looked down at the small dragon, whose scales had begun to glow with the effort of maintaining his complex transmutations. Ember was powerful, but he was still very young, and the strain of enhancing an entire starship while under attack was beginning to show. "There has to be another way," Maya muttered, her xenobiology training searching for solutions. "Ember's abilities are incredible, but he needs time to rest and recover. We can't ask him to maintain this pace all the way to the nebula." Another barrage of weapons fire-hammered against their enhanced hull, and this time the damage was more serious. Ember's song became strained as he struggled to repair systems faster than they were being destroyed. The little dragon was pushing himself beyond safe limits, and Maya could see exhaustion beginning to affect his coordination. "Zeph, she said suddenly. "What do you know about the space between here and the nebula? Are there any obstacles, debris fields, anything we could use for cover?" "There's an asteroid cluster about 2 hours ahead of us," Zeph said, consulting his navigation data. "But it won't provide much concealment from their sensors." "What if we don't need concealment?" Maya asked, an idea beginning to form. "What if we need raw materials?" Zeph's 4 eyes widened as he understood her implication. "You think Ember could transmute asteroid material into something useful?" "I think Ember could transmute asteroid material into something impossible," Maya corrected. "Something the Coalition has never seen before." She knelt beside the exhausted dragon, stroking his scales as he continued to sing his ship-healing song. "Ember, sweetie, I need you to save your strength. When we reach those asteroids, I'm going to ask you to do something that's never been done before." Ember looked up at her with complete trust, his song fading as he allowed the ship to return to its normal configuration. Immediately, the Coalition vessels began to gain ground again, their weapons preparing for another devastating barrage. "Maya," Zeph said urgently, "we're going to take heavy damage without his enhancements." "I know," she replied, watching the tactical display as their pursuers closed the distance. "But if this plan works, we won't need to outrun them anymore." The next hour was harrowing. Without Ember's enhancements, the Stellar Wanderer took hit after hit from Coalition weapons. The hull held but barely, and several secondary systems failed completely. Zeph performed miracles of piloting to keep them ahead of their pursuers, but everyone aboard knew it was only a matter of time before a lucky shot ended their escape. "Asteroid cluster in visual range," Zeph announced. Maya looked through the viewports at a scattered field of rocky debris, the remnants of some ancient planetary collision that had left behind millions of fragments ranging from pebbles to mountain-sized chunks. To most species, it represented a navigation hazard. To Maya's mind, it was the galaxy's largest supply depot. "Take us into the thickest part of the cluster," she instructed. "Get as close to the largest asteroids as you can manage. The Coalition ships will follow us in," Zephi warned. "In close quarters, their superior firepower will be even more decisive. Not if they're too busy dealing with other problems to shoot at us," Maya said cryptically. She turned to Ember, who had been resting in preparation for whatever she had planned. "Are you ready to show the galaxy something it's never seen before?" Ember's response was to begin singing again, but this time his song was different. Instead of the healing harmonies he had used on their ship, his melody carried undertones of creation, transformation, and power on a scale that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. The effect began slowly. The asteroids nearest to their ship began to glow with soft inner light as Ember's influence touched them. Then, impossible as it seemed, they began to move with purpose rather than the random drift of debris. "He's controlling them?" Zephi asked in amazement. "He's not controlling them," Maya corrected, watching in wonder as the asteroids began to link together with bridges of transmuted material. "He's awakening them." The rocky debris was transforming into something that defied classification. Part space station, part living organism, part fortress, the growing construction reached out with tendrils of crystallized energy to embrace more asteroids and incorporate them into an ever-expanding structure that seemed to follow principles of engineering that no known species had ever developed. The Coalition pursuit vessels found themselves facing something that their tactical computers couldn't even categorize. What had been empty space filled with navigational hazards was rapidly becoming a vast artificial construction that blocked their sensors and made weapon targeting impossible. "All ships, break off pursuit and withdraw to safe distance," came the order from the Coalition commander. "Request immediate backup from Xenological Threat Assessment Division." But withdrawal was no longer an option. The growing asteroid structure had surrounded the Coalition ships with walls of transformed rock that moved to block every escape route. Energy tendrils reached out to gently, but firmly grasp the pursuit vessels, holding them in place without damaging their hulls. "They're trapped," Zephi observed with satisfaction. "Ember has created a prison around them." Maya felt a mixture of relief and concern as she watched Ember continue his impossible creation. The small dragon was clearly operating at the very limits of his abilities, his scales glowing so brightly they were painful to look at directly. But his song continued, strong and determined, as he completed the most ambitious transmutation in recorded galactic history. When the construction was finally complete, they found themselves inside a vast space habitat that incorporated the best features of stations designed by dozens of different species. The asteroid material had been transformed into living walls that provided perfect atmospheric recycling. Gardens of impossible beauty grew in chambers where gravity flowed in artistic patterns. Energy distribution systems channeled power with perfect efficiency throughout a structure that could easily house thousands of inhabitants. And at the center of it all, 3 Coalition pursuit vessels sat in holding bays that had formed around them like vast hands, keeping them safe but completely immobilized. "What is this place?" Zephi whispered, staring at readings that suggested they were inside something that was simultaneously technology and biology, matter and energy constructed and grown. "I think," Maya said softly, watching Ember finally settle into exhausted sleep in her lap. "This is what happens when dragons and humans work together without anyone telling them it's impossible." The communication system came to life with transmission from the trapped Coalition ships. This time, the voice carried confusion and, or rather than authority. "Unknown vessel, please identify your construction methods and intentions. Our sensors indicate you have created a stable artificial environment using principles that appear to violate fundamental physical laws." Maya exchanged glances with Zephi, then activated their transmitter. "Coalition vessels, this is Dr. Maya Chun, xenobiologist and refugee. You came here to destroy something you were told was dangerous. Instead, you've witnessed the birth of something wonderful. Dr. Chun, you are harboring a Class A extinct species in violation of Galactic Security Protocol 7. You must surrender the creature immediately for proper containment. The only thing that needs containment here are the lies your government has told about Pyrothian dragons, Maya replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just witnessed impossible things become reality. We're not surrendering anything, but we're willing to negotiate. The long pause that followed suggested that the coalition forces were consulting with higher authorities about a situation that clearly fell outside standard protocols. Finally, a new voice came through their communicators, older, carrying more authority, but also genuine curiosity. Dr. Chun, this is Admiral Corvex of the Coalition Science Division. I've been reviewing the sensor data from our pursuit vessels. What we're seeing appears to be impossible according to our understanding of matter manipulation physics. Your understanding is incomplete, Admiral, Maya responded. And that's not an accident. Are you claiming that our historical records regarding Pyrothian dragons are inaccurate? Maya looked down at Ember, who was sleeping peacefully despite having just created a space habitat that surpassed anything the Coalition had ever built. I'm saying that your historical records are propaganda designed to cover up genocide. The communication channel went silent for several minutes. When Admiral Corvex spoke again, his tone had changed completely. Dr. Chun, I would like to propose a meeting under truce conditions. What you've shown us today demands investigation, and I believe we have much to discuss. Maya felt hope begin to bloom in her chest for the first time since their escape from Sanctuary Station. The demonstration of Ember's true capabilities had accomplished something she had never dared to imagine. It had made the Coalition willing to listen. Admiral, she said carefully, I'm willing to discuss terms for a meeting, but understand that my primary responsibility is to protect Ember. Any agreement we reach must guarantee his safety. Dr. Chun, after what we've witnessed today, I think the safety of all involved parties is going to depend on understanding exactly what your companion is capable of and what your people and his species might accomplish working together. As Maya began to negotiate the terms for humanity's first honest discussion with galactic authority about the truth behind dragon extinction, Ember slept peacefully in her lap, surrounded by the impossible beauty of the habitat he had created from asteroid dust and starlight. The galaxy was about to learn that its most cherished lies had been built on the graves of its greatest possibilities. And a 19-year-old xenobiologist and her baby dragon were going to be the ones to teach that lesson. The conference chamber that materialized within Ember's asteroid habitat was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The small dragon had somehow intuited the need for a neutral meeting space and had grown it from the living walls overnight, creating an environment that seemed designed to put representatives from multiple species at ease. Admiral Corvex, a distinguished Threnodai with silver-scaled skin and the measured bearing of someone accustomed to command, stood examining the chamber's bioluminescent walls with obvious fascination. His security detail remained near the entrance, clearly uncomfortable with the organic technology surrounding them, but unable to deny its beauty. Maya sat across from him at a table that had grown from the floor like crystallized water, its surface perfectly smooth and somehow warm to the touch. Ember perched on her shoulder, alert and curious, but showing none of the aggressive behaviors that Coalition mythology attributed to his species. Zephi stood behind Maya's chair, his presence serving as both protection and silent testimony that their cause had support beyond just human participants. Dr. Chun, Admiral Corvex began, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to address uncomfortable truths. I've spent the past 12 hours reviewing classified archives that most Coalition officials never see. What I found there has challenged my understanding of recent galactic history. Maya felt her heart rate increase, but kept her expression neutral. What specific archives, Admiral? Records from the species elimination protocols implemented against the Pyrothian dragons. Technical specifications for weapons designed specifically for anti-dragon warfare. Most disturbing of all, intelligence reports from the period immediately preceding the Great Purge. Corvex activated a holographic display that filled the space between them with documents Maya had never seen before. These reports detail extensive surveillance of human-dragon partnerships during the colonial expansion period. What they describe bears no resemblance to the official historical narrative. The documents painted a picture that made Maya's xenobiology training revolt against the injustice of it all. Surveillance footage showed human colonists working alongside adult dragons to terraform worlds that should have been uninhabitable. Scientific reports documented crop yield that exceeded theoretical maximums through dragon-assisted agriculture. Most remarkable were the communication transcripts that revealed dragons and humans developing what appeared to be shared languages and cultural practices. The colonies with dragon partners were succeeding beyond anything we'd seen before, Corvex continued. They were establishing sustainable civilizations on worlds that other species couldn't even survey safely. Within 50 years, human dragon settlements might have dominated entire sectors. So you eliminated them, Maya said, her voice carrying controlled anger. You destroyed entire civilizations because they were too successful. The decision was made by a coalition council that feared human expansion would destabilize existing territorial boundaries, Corvex admitted. But the intelligence reports show something else, Dr. Chun. They show that the dragons weren't just helping humans survive hostile environments. They were actively choosing humans as partners over other species. Maya looked down at Ember, who was listening to the conversation with obvious understanding. Why would that matter? Because it suggested that dragons possessed some form of precognitive ability that allowed them to identify which species had the greatest potential for future development, Corvex explained. The coalition's xenobiologists theorized that dragons could somehow sense evolutionary possibilities that other species couldn't detect. The implications of that revelation sent a chill through Maya's understanding of galactic politics. If dragons could identify species with exceptional development potential, then their preference for human partnership suggested something about humanity that the established galactic order found threatening. You're saying the dragons saw something in humans that made the coalition nervous about our future development, Maya said. I'm saying the dragons saw something in humans that made the coalition believe extinction was preferable to coexistence, Corvex corrected grimly. The archived discussions from that period are quite explicit about viewing human-dragon partnerships as an existential threat to established civilization. Ember chose that moment to demonstrate exactly why such concerns might have been justified. The small dragon began to sing softly, and the chamber around them responded by generating a three-dimensional star map that showed the entire galactic region with perfect accuracy. But instead of static display, the map showed probability flows, potential futures branching and converging based on different decision paths. He's modeling temporal possibilities, Maya breathed in amazement. He's showing us what might happen based on different choices we could make. The star map focused on the asteroid habitat they currently occupied, then began to show potential futures radiating outward like branches of an infinite tree. Some paths showed the habitat growing into a massive space city that hosted multiple species in harmony. Others showed it becoming a research center where dragons and humans unlocked scientific principles that revolutionized galactic civilization. Still others showed it as the birthplace of new forms of art, culture, and philosophy that spread throughout the galaxy like gentle waves of positive change. But there were darker branches as well, paths that showed coalition fleets arriving to destroy everything they had built. Futures where fear and prejudice led to expanded wars that devastated entire sectors. Possibilities where the knowledge of dragon survival was suppressed so completely that the galaxy never learned what they might have accomplished together. Remarkable, Corvex whispered, studying the probability flows with the fascination of someone seeing the fundamental nature of causality laid bare. He's not just showing us possible futures. He's showing us the consequences of our choices in real time. Maya reached up to stroke Ember's scales, and immediately the probability map shifted to highlight the paths where trust and cooperation led to the most positive outcomes. He's trying to show us the best way forward. Dr. Chun, Corvex said carefully, I need you to understand the position this puts the coalition in. What your companion has just demonstrated represents technology that could revolutionize strategic planning, resource allocation, and conflict prevention on a galactic scale. And you're worried about what humans might do with that kind of capability, Maya said, understanding the subtext. I'm worried about what everyone might do with that kind of capability, Corvex corrected. The ability to model future probabilities with this level of accuracy would fundamentally alter the balance of power between every species in the galaxy. Maya stood up, and Ember moved to her shoulder with the easy grace of long familiarity. Admiral, let me ask you something. In all those archived reports about human-dragon partnerships, did you find any evidence of aggressive expansion, territorial conquest, or attempts to dominate other species. Corvex consulted his data display, though Maya suspected he already knew the answer. No, the human dragon colonies showed remarkable restraint in their territorial claims and actually provided assistance to struggling settlements from other species. Because that's who we are, Maya said simply. Humans don't seek to conquer. We seek to help things grow. We take in refugees. We heal the wounded. We protect the vulnerable. When you give us incredible power, we use it to make life better for everyone around us. To demonstrate her point, Maya nodded to Ember, who immediately began to modify the chamber around them. The walls grew transparent, revealing that the asteroid habitat now hosted a variety of life forms that had somehow found their way into the structure. Small creatures that looked like living crystals grew in garden spaces Ember had created. Schools of what appeared to be space-adapted fish swam through liquid chambers that provided them with perfect habitat. Even some of the pursuit ship crews have been allowed to explore parts of the habitat and were visible through the transparent walls, studying the impossible biology with obvious wonder. He's been creating homes for every life form that approaches the habitat, Maya explained. Not because we asked him to, not because there's any strategic advantage, but because that's his nature when he feels safe and loved. Admiral Corvex studied the diverse ecosystem that was flourishing within the asteroid habitat and made a decision that would reshape galactic history. Dr. Chun, I'm prepared to recommend to the Coalition Council that the extinction protocols regarding Pyrothian dragons be permanently suspended. Maya felt hope bloom in her chest, but Corvex's expression suggested there was more to his offer. However, he continued, the Council will require guarantees that human-dragon partnerships won't be used to destabilize existing territorial boundaries or threaten Coalition member species. What kind of guarantees? Maya asked. The Council will want to establish a formal monitoring program, regular contact, progress reports, and, most importantly, access to any technologies or capabilities that emerge from your partnership with Ember. Maya looked at Zeph High, whose expression had grown thoughtful. What does that mean in practical terms, Admiral? The Kethmori asked. It means that Dr. Chun and Ember would become the galaxy's first officially recognized human-dragon diplomatic team, Corvex explained. They would work directly with Coalition authorities to develop protocols for any other dragon survivors that might be discovered, and to research the full potential of human-dragon cooperation under control conditions. The offer was both generous and restrictive. Maya would have official protection for Ember and support for their partnership, but they would also be under constant observation and would have to share their discoveries with the same authorities who had previously ordered dragon extinction. And if I refuse? Maya asked. Then, the Coalition will likely return to the previous protocols, Corvex said regretfully. Not because I believe they're right, but because the Council fears what they don't understand. Maya looked up at Ember, who was watching the conversation with obvious intelligence. The small dragon met her gaze and made a soft sound that she had learned to recognize as his expression of trust in her judgment. I need time to consider your offer, Maya said finally. Of course. But, Dr. Chun, I should mention that there have been other sightings in recent months. Sensor anomalies that suggest dragon activity in at least 3 different sectors. If your partnership with Ember could provide a model for peaceful coexistence, it might save other survivors from the fate that befell their species. The weight of responsibility settled on Maya's shoulders. Her choice wouldn't just affect her and Ember, it would determine the future of every dragon that had managed to survive the Great Purge, and possibly the future of human expansion into the galaxy. I'll give you my answer tomorrow, she said. Corvex nodded and prepared to leave with his security detail. But, as he reached the chamber entrance, he turned back with a question that had been troubling him. Dr. Chun, one thing puzzles me about this entire situation. How did you know to trust Ember when you first found him? According to our records, you should have been terrified of encountering a dragon. Maya smiled, remembering the moment she had discovered a tiny, cold, hungry creature trying to eat broken eggshells in an abandoned section of Sanctuary Station. Admiral, when you see a baby who needs help, you don't check his species classification before deciding to care for him. You just do what's right. That simple philosophy had somehow accomplished what centuries of diplomatic negotiation had failed to achieve. It had brought together 2 species that could reshape the galaxy if they worked together, and it had convinced galactic authority to choose cooperation over extermination. As the Coalition delegation departed, Maya found herself alone with Zephi and Ember in the miraculous habitat that had grown from asteroid dust and dragon song. Tomorrow, she would make a decision that would echo through galactic history. Tonight, she was simply a xenobiologist sitting with her friends in the most beautiful space station ever created, watching impossible gardens grow under the light of alien stars. Ember curled up in her lap and began to purr, the sound resonating through the living walls to create a harmony that spoke of peace, possibility, and the profound power of choosing love over fear. The galaxy was about to learn what humans and dragons could accomplish together when given the chance to prove that cooperation was always stronger than conquest. 1 year later, the Kalian research habitat had become the most visited location in Coalition space, and Maya Chun had become the most unlikely diplomat in galactic history. The asteroid station that Ember had grown from debris and starlight now hosted representatives from 47 different species, all eager to study the revolutionary partnership between humans and Pyrothian dragons. Maya stood on the observation deck of the habitat's newest wing, watching as construction crews of mixed species worked alongside dragons to build what would become the galaxy's first interspecies university. The dragons, 3 more survivors have been found and brought to the habitat over the past months, worked with their human partners to transmute raw materials into architectural marvels that defied conventional engineering principles. Dr. Chun, came a familiar voice behind her. The morning briefing is ready to begin. Maya turned to see Zephi approaching, his official guardian uniform now decorated with the insignia of the Coalition's newly formed Interspecies Cooperation Division. He had been promoted to Director of Security for the Habitat, a position that made him responsible for protecting what had become the galaxy's most valuable diplomatic asset. "How many delegations today?" Maya asked, settling Ember on her shoulder as they walked toward the conference center. 12, including representatives from the Andromedan Trade Federation and the Outer Rim Independent Systems, Zephi replied. "They're all requesting the same thing: assistance establishing their own human-dragon partnership programs." The irony wasn't lost on Maya. Less than 2 years ago, both humans and dragons were considered either refugees or extinct threats. Now, they were the galaxy's most sought-after diplomatic team, and their cooperation model was being studied by civilizations across multiple sectors. The conference center that morning was filled with beings Maya was still learning to identify. The Andromedan delegation consisted of crystalline entities who communicated through harmonic resonance, while the Outer Rim representatives were a collective of cybernetic beings who had transcended their original biological forms centuries ago. Dr. Chun, spoke the lead Andromedan through a translation matrix. "Our preliminary studies suggest that Pyrothian dragon abilities could solve the atmospheric degradation problems that have plagued our homeworld for 3 centuries. Maya glanced at Ember, who had developed an uncanny ability to understand even translated communications. The small dragon, now considerably larger than when they had first met, though still small by adult standards, tilted his head in consideration before making a soft, questioning sound. "Ember wants to know about the specific atmospheric composition," Maya translated, though she still marveled at her ability to interpret his communications. "He's particularly interested in the molecular structure of the contaminants." The Andromedan delegation immediately began projecting complex chemical formulas into the shared holographic display. Ember studied the information for several minutes, occasionally making soft sounds that Maya had learned indicated deep thought. Finally, Ember began to sing, his voice weaving harmonies that created a 3-dimensional molecular model showing how atmospheric contaminants could be transmuted into beneficial compounds. The process he demonstrated would not only clean the Andromedan atmosphere, but would leave it more suitable for life than it had been before the original contamination. "Remarkable," whispered the lead Andromedan. "He's showing us possibilities our finest scientists never considered." The healing process would take approximately 18 months, with a team of 4 adult dragons working in partnership with Andromedan atmospheric engineers, Maya explained, reading Ember's intentions through their growing mental connection. But Ember wants assurances that the dragons would be welcomed as permanent partners, not just temporary contractors. Dr. Chen interjected, the Outer Rim collective representative. "Our situation is somewhat different. We've transcended biological limitations, but we've discovered that our technological evolution has reached a plateau. We believe human-dragon partnerships might provide insights that pure technological advancement cannot." This was a more complex request, and Maya found herself drawing on everything she had learned about interspecies diplomacy over the past year. What specific insights are you seeking? The ability to create truly living technology, the collective replied. Your habitat demonstrates a fusion of organic and technological elements that suggest possibilities we cannot achieve through conventional means. Maya looked around the conference center, noting how its walls seemed to breathe with their own life, while simultaneously providing all the technological functions of an advanced communication facility. Everything in the habitat existed in perfect harmony between natural growth and design purpose. Ember and his family could certainly work with your engineers to explore those possibilities, Maya said carefully. But I have to ask, what would you offer in return? Human-dragon partnerships work because they're based on mutual benefit and genuine affection. Ember doesn't respond well to purely transactional relationships. As if to demonstrate her point, Ember left Maya's shoulder to explore the conference chamber, approaching each delegation with curious interest. When he reached the Andromedan representatives, his scales took on crystalline patterns that echoed their harmonic communication style. With the cybernetic collective, his bioelectric field began to pulse in patterns that interfaced directly with their technological systems. He's trying to understand each of you on your own terms, Maya explained. Dragon empathy isn't just emotional, it's physiological. Ember can literally adapt his biology to better connect with other species. The demonstration had its intended effect. Each delegation began to discuss not what they could gain from dragon partnerships, but what they could offer in return. The Andromedans spoke of sharing their harmonic technologies and crystal growing techniques. The Outer Rim Collective offered access to computational matrices that could enhance dragon abilities in ways they had never explored. This is what human-dragon partnerships have always been about, Maya said, addressing the assembled representatives. Not exploitation or conquest, but genuine collaboration where each partner contributes something valuable and unique. Admiral Corvex, who had been observing from the back of the chamber, stepped forward with an announcement that made Maya's heart race with excitement. Dr. Chun, I've been authorized by the Coalition Council to expand the interspecies cooperation program. We're prepared to establish similar research habitats in 5 additional sectors, each one designed to explore different aspects of human-dragon partnership. The scope of what he was proposing was breathtaking. Instead of the single experimental facility they had been operating, the Coalition was ready to create an entire network of cooperation centers that could reshape galactic civilization. What would my role be in such an expansion? Maya asked. You would serve as the director of interspecies relations for the entire program, Corvex explained. Your experience with Ember has proven that human-dragon partnerships can work, but, more importantly, you've demonstrated that they can work while maintaining peaceful relationships with other species. Maya looked down at Ember, who had returned to her side, and was purring with obvious contentment. The small dragon who had once been alone and hungry in an abandoned station corridor was now the center of a diplomatic revolution that was changing how species interacted throughout the galaxy. There's something else, Corvex continued. Our deep space surveys have located what appears to be a previously unknown dragon breeding ground in the Vega Nebula. If the site is authentic, there could be hundreds of eggs in various stages of development. The news sent a shock through Maya's system. She had assumed that Ember and the few other survivors they had found represented the last of their species. The possibility that there might be an entire new generation of dragons waiting to be hatched opened up possibilities she had never dared to imagine. A full dragon recovery program would require extensive human participation, Maya said, her xenobiology training automatically calculating the resources and expertise needed. We need specialists in developmental biology, environmental engineering, and interspecies psychology. The Coalition is prepared to provide whatever resources are necessary, Corvex assured her. Dr. Chun, what you've accomplished here has proven that the galaxy is stronger when species work together rather than in competition. We're ready to make human-dragon partnerships a cornerstone of galactic policy. Maya felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders once again. A year ago, she had been a refugee cleaning station corridors for basic survival. Now she was being asked to lead a program that could reshape civilization across the galaxy. The transformation seemed impossible, but then again she had learned that impossibility was often just another word for opportunity. I'll accept the position, she said, but with conditions. Name them. Korvax replied immediately. First, any dragon recovery operations must prioritize the welfare of the dragons above all other considerations. No hatchling will be forced into partnership if they don't choose it freely. Agreed. Second, human participation in the program must remain voluntary. We've proven that human-dragon bonds work best when they grow from genuine affection and mutual respect. Also agreed. Third, Maya said, stroking Ember's scales as he settled into her lap. Every partnership must be given the freedom to develop in their own way. Ember and I have found our path together, but other human-dragon pairs might discover completely different forms of cooperation. Dr. Chun, Korvax said with something that might have been admiration, those conditions demonstrate exactly why you're the right person to lead this program. The meeting concluded with formal agreements that would have taken months to negotiate under normal diplomatic protocols. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Maya had learned that goodwill and demonstrated success could accomplish more than lengthy bureaucratic processes. As the various delegations departed to begin preparations for their own human-dragon partnership programs, Maya found herself alone on the observation deck with Zephi and Ember, watching the stars that no longer seemed quite so distant or forbidding. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had followed standard protocols that first night? Maya asked Zephi. The Kethmori's scales rippled with what she had learned to recognize as amusement. I try not to think about paths not taken, he said. But I suspect the galaxy would be a much darker place. Ember chose that moment to demonstrate just how much he had grown over the past year. His song filled the observation deck with harmonies that reached out to touch the stars themselves, and suddenly, the void around their habitat came alive with responding music. Other dragons, scattered across the galaxy in partnerships that were already beginning to flourish, were adding their voices to his song. The melody that emerged spoke of hope, growth, and infinite possibility. It was the sound of a future where species worked together not because they had to, but because they had discovered that cooperation created beauty and wonder that none of them could achieve alone. Listen, Maya whispered, tears running down her cheeks as she heard the voices of dragons she had never met singing in harmony with the small creature who had started it all. They're not extinct. They never were. They were just waiting for someone to give them a chance. Zephi's 4 hands moved in the Kethmori gesture of profound respect. You didn't save one dragon, Maya. You saved an entire species. No, Maya corrected, looking down at Ember, whose scales now glowed with the reflected light of distant stars and the warmth of belonging. We saved each other. The dragon's song continued far into the night, carrying messages of love and partnership across the vast distances between worlds. And everywhere it reached, species that had never considered cooperation began to wonder what they might accomplish if they learned to work together instead of apart. The revolution that had begun with a girl who couldn't bear to let a baby dragon go hungry had become a transformation that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. And, at its heart, it remained exactly what it had always been, a simple act of kindness between 2 beings who had found family in the most unexpected place. Maya looked out at the stars and smiled, knowing that somewhere in that vast expanse, hundreds of dragon eggs were waiting to hatch into a universe where cooperation had finally triumphed over fear. The galaxy had learned its greatest lesson from its smallest teachers, that love, given freely and without condition, was the most powerful force in the universe. And, in her lap, Ember purred with contentment, secure in the knowledge that he would never be alone again, and that his children and their children would grow up in a galaxy where being different was celebrated rather than feared. The future had never looked brighter or sounded more beautiful than it did, filled with dragon song and human laughter echoing between the stars. The end.